The breach was sudden, violent, an eruption of twisted metal and crackling energy as the alien vessel tore into the heart of the human fleet. Commander Mara Hawk stood at the bridge's viewport, her hands clasped behind her back, eyes cold and calculating as the chaos unfolded before her. Her fingers itched for action. She didn't flinch at the flashing alerts or the shrill screech of the hull under assault. She was beyond fear. To her, the battle was merely an inevitable crescendo, a prelude to what was to come. Shields at 20%, the voice of Lieutenant Riker cut through the din, but Hawk didn't react. Her focus was on the alien ship, now looming like a sickened, bloated insect in the vastness of space. The ship's enemies, the Zorathian, had been growing bolder, attacking without warning, without mercy. Their fleets had begun appearing in the far reaches of human space, systematically ravaging colony worlds with surgical precision. But today was different. Commander Riker tried again, but Hawk held up a hand, silencing him. She turned slowly, her eyes scanning the faces of her crew. Fear clung to them like a second skin, but they knew better than to voice it. They were soldiers. They had trained for this. They had endured. Her eyes settled on Corporal Annika Keel, standing at the weapons console, her knuckles pale as she gripped the firing mechanism. Keel's breath was shallow, her body taut with the tension of anticipation. Mara knew what she was feeling, the urge to fire, to retaliate against the monstrous creatures that had slaughtered billions. But Mara didn't feel that urge. She understood something that the others didn't. Something deeper, darker. Something that would shake the very foundations of what it meant to be human. "Let them come," Mara murmured, her voice barely a whisper, but it was enough to freeze the entire bridge. The crew exchanged glances. Keel's brow furrowed, her voice cracking with barely contained anger. "Commander, we can't just sit here. They're slaughtering us." Mara stepped toward her, her boots tapping softly against the deck, a sound that seemed too calm for the storm outside. "You think they're slaughtering us?" she asked, leaning in close. "This isn't slaughter. This is just a preview. A taste of what's coming." Keel blinked, confusion evident in her eyes. "What are you talking about?" The words that followed hung in the air, heavy, unsettling. "War has never been understood in its entirety. Not by anyone. Not until now." Suddenly, the lights flickered. Alarms blared, flashing red, signaling an incoming breach. The Zorathian had made their move, boarding parties were attempting to infiltrate the ship. The sound of boots thundering down the corridors outside reverberated through the walls. A cold shiver crept down Keel's spine, but Mara's expression remained unreadable. She straightened, her hand going to the holster at her side, drawing the plasma pistol with the fluid precision of a seasoned soldier. "Lock down all access points," Mara commanded, her voice unyielding. "Prepare for hand-to-hand." The bridge fell into a practiced frenzy, but it was more of a ritual than a true display of panic. The crew moved like clockwork, securing weapons and closing blast doors. Keel's hands shook as she sealed the weapons cache, her breath catching as the echoes of Zorathian shrieks grew louder. They were close. Too close. Mara's eyes never wavered from the viewport, watching the alien forces descending on the ship with unnerving calm. "We've underestimated them," she muttered to herself, voice low. "But we'll show them what they've overlooked." Keel shot her a glance, eyes wide with something like disbelief. "What do you mean?" "They're killing us in droves." Mara's lips curled into a thin smile. "They think we're like them. A few ships, a few hundred soldiers, and we fold. But we won't." She turned sharply toward Keel, her face cold with purpose. "We're not just fighting for survival. This war? This is something else. This is the moment humanity stands up." Keel's eyes narrowed, her fear beginning to shift into something more dangerous, something fierce. Mara saw the transformation. This wasn't just about winning the battle. It was about proving that humans were a force to be reckoned with. "Ready, Corporal?" Mara asked, voice quiet but charged with an energy that electrified the room. Keel's breath caught, and for a moment, she hesitated. Then, with a slow exhale, she nodded. Ready. Good, Mara said, pulling her own rifle free. Let's give them hell. Outside the bridge, the first Zorathian soldiers breached the threshold, their hulking bodies darkened by the dim lighting of the corridor. Their jagged weapons gleamed, reflecting the cold light of the starry expanse. But what the Zorathians didn't know was that humanity, was about to show them that war wasn't just a game of violence. It was something far, far worse. And they were about to learn that the hard way. 20 seconds to impact, Riker's voice was strained, his breath coming in short gasps, betraying the fear that gripped him despite his best efforts. He wasn't made for this kind of war. He was a strategist, not a soldier. Mara didn't spare him a glance. Stay calm, Lieutenant. We've faced worse. Riker wasn't sure if that was meant to comfort him or just a cold fact to prepare him for the inevitable. He glanced at her then, the back of his commander's rigid form casting a long shadow in the dim light of the bridge. She was standing perfectly still, her expression unreadable, even though the sounds of destruction filled the room. She always looked like that. Detached. Invincible. He hated it. The enemy ship, a massive, insectoid thing with countless spiny appendages, was tearing through their formation. Its advanced weaponry seemed to cut through their defenses as if they were paper. The Zorathian were brutal, intelligent, and relentless. But they didn't understand humanity. Not yet. Captain Calloway, Mara's voice finally broke the silence, sharp and clipped. She didn't need to raise it, not when everyone already knew who was in charge. Deploy the countermeasures. Aye, Commander, Captain Calloway, her second in command, said without hesitation. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a square jaw and a permanent frown that seemed to etch itself deeper every day they fought these invaders. He was older than Mara, probably too old for the grind of endless war, but he had a loyalty that ran deeper than most men's ability to understand. Mara watched him for a second longer than was usual. He wasn't just her officer, he was a remnant of humanity's last line of defense against a cold, unfeeling universe. She trusted him implicitly, but sometimes she wondered how much longer they could hold the line. How much longer she could. The countdown on the bridge console blinked red. 5 seconds. The vessel shook violently as the first of the Zorathians' blasts hit them dead on. Sparks exploded across the control panels, and the artificial gravity flickered. Mara's lips twitched into a small, calculating smile. Impact in 3, 2. The ship lurched, and everything went black for a moment. When the lights returned, the view from the viewport had shifted. The Zorathian ship was closer now, too close. They were running out of time. Mara turned, her boots thudding softly against the floor as she made her way to the console. Riker. Report. His face was pale, his lips tight, but he didn't hesitate. Shields are gone, Commander. Hull integrity is at 30%. We're losing power to the aft engines. Mara didn't flinch. Prepare for boarding. We'll make sure they regret this. Riker blinked, his eyes wide. But, you don't. Prepare. Her voice was low, commanding. Calloway had already moved to assist, typing commands into his console with quick, precise movements. The captain had the same steel in his eyes as Mara did, a quiet understanding that sometimes the line between life and death was just a question of who hit hardest. The Zorathian were already deploying their pods, small, fast, and deadly. Mara could hear the sharp hiss of their landing pods impacting on the hull, followed by the shrill whine of alien weapons cutting through the air. Ready the Marines, she ordered, already strapping her sidearm into place. The cold, familiar weight of it was comforting. She was always ready for this. You sure you want to do this, Commander? Riker's voice cracked, fear creeping into his words. We're outgunned, outnumbered. Even if we manage to break through, there's no guarantee we. Don't question me, Lieutenant, Mara snapped, her voice icy. This isn't just about surviving anymore. It's about making them understand. They think they can break us. That we're weak. But that's where they're wrong. Her eyes locked onto his. We'll make them regret every second they thought they could touch us. The air was thick with tension as the first burst of Zorathian fire slammed into the ship, and the Marines scrambled into position, preparing to repel the invaders. This wasn't just another battle. Not anymore. The door to the bridge opened with a sharp hiss, and the first of the Zorathian soldiers came into view, tall, with long segmented limbs and glistening, jet-black exoskeletons. Their alien eyes glowed an unnatural green, locking onto the humans with an unsettling, predatory gaze. Mara stepped forward, drawing her weapon. Her voice was calm, deadly. Let's show them who they're messing with. The Zorathian would learn the truth soon enough. Humanity wasn't just surviving. They were fighting back. And it was going to be a lesson they'd never forget. The battle had descended into madness. The Zorathian warship had cleaved through their formation, and now, the wreckage of human ships drifted in the cold, unforgiving expanse of space like shattered bones. The air on the bridge was thick with tension, the smell of burnt circuits and ionized metal stinging Mara's nostrils. The pulse of the damaged ship's heartbeat was erratic, and the lights flickered, casting jagged shadows across the faces of the crew. Mara stood at the viewport, her stance unyielding, arms crossed. A slight smile curled on her lips as she watched the unfolding chaos outside. The human fleet was retreating, pulling back into formation, but the Zorathian vessel wasn't relenting. It knew it had them on the ropes. It was too easy, and Mara hated easy. Report, Riker. Her voice was calm, almost detached, but there was a sharpness to it, a command that demanded precision. Riker was sweating, his knuckles white as he gripped the console. The outer hull's compromised. Secondary powers down to 17%. If we don't make a move soon, we'll be sitting ducks. Mara didn't react. She could feel the ship's groaning protests, the strained whine of systems gasping for breath. She could feel the weakness of it, but what did that matter? It was her ship now. She would never show fear. She would never show weakness. What's the status of the other ships? She asked. Most are pulling back. We've lost contact with Captain Calloway's ship. Riker hesitated, and Mara knew what he wasn't saying. Calloway's ship had likely been destroyed, torn apart in the first wave of the attack. It was a cold reality, sacrifice was part of the equation in war. The human fleet wasn't accustomed to defeat, but Mara knew this was just another lesson in the price of survival. The silence that followed felt suffocating, but Mara embraced it. The crew watched her, waiting for her next command. And she let the moment stretch longer than necessary, drawing out the tension. Helm, she said finally, her voice low, prepare for evasive maneuvers. We're going to engage. There was a collective gasp. What? Riker's voice cracked with disbelief. We're engaging. Mara repeated, turning her sharp eyes toward him. Are you questioning my orders, Lieutenant? No, ma'am, Riker said quickly, but there was something unreadable in his eyes. Fear? Respect? He wasn't sure anymore. Mara wasn't sure either. All she knew was that there was no room for hesitation now. This was her moment, their moment, and she wasn't going to waste it. The Zorathian ship was closing in, its jagged silhouette looming on the edge of her vision. Mara's fingers twitched with the hunger for battle. But this time, it wasn't just about survival. She could feel it in her bones. The Zorathians thought they understood war. But they had no idea what humanity was capable of when pushed to the brink. Activate the forward cannons, Mara barked. Lock onto their engines. The crew scrambled to comply, fingers flying over the controls. The low hum of power surged beneath Mara's feet, the ship's pulse synchronizing with her own. She could almost taste the tension in the air, thick and metallic. Riker swallowed, his voice tight with disbelief. Commander, are you telling me you want to attack while we're this damaged? We can barely stay in the air. I'm telling you to trust me, Lieutenant. Now fire. Her command rang out, final and absolute. The ship shuddered as the forward cannons roared to life, sending a barrage of energy blasts hurtling toward the Zorathian vessel. For a split second, Mara watched the alien ship's shields flare bright, crackling under the assault, but then, something else happened. The Zorathians didn't retreat. They adapted. The enemy ship's response was fast, too fast. It deployed smaller ships, sleek, darting like predators, and within seconds, the human ship was swarmed. The bridge erupted into chaos. Sparks flew, alarms blared. Riker's voice broke through the din, strained with urgency. "We're surrounded. We can't. Don't stop firing," Mara commanded, her voice unyielding. And she watched as the chaos continued to unfold. But the way she stood there, commanding the wreckage, unshaken, told everyone else something they hadn't fully understood yet. This wasn't just about surviving. This wasn't just about the mission or the ship. No. This was about proving something far darker, something the Zorathians, and humanity, would soon come to understand. They had underestimated her. The enemy may have had strength, technology, and firepower, but Mara Hawke had something else. Something more primal. Something they couldn't predict. Humanity had learned to fight to survive. But she had learned how to fight to win. Mara's hand was steady on the command console, though the tremors of the ship's failing systems rattled beneath her feet. Her eyes flicked over the readouts, another power surge, another system failure. Yet, beneath the weight of it all, she remained eerily calm. This was where she thrived. Chaos was a comfort, not a threat. Lieutenant Riker's voice broke through the controlled stillness of the bridge. "Commander, we can't hold out much longer. The Zorathian ship has deployed boarding parties. They're making their way to the core." Mara's eyes narrowed. Boarding parties meant they had moved beyond simple conquest. They were targeting the heart of the ship. They were hunting for something more than destruction. "You've miscalculated, Zorathians," she muttered under her breath. "Commander?" Riker asked, catching her whispered words. "I said," Mara straightened, her voice cutting through the static air like a blade, "they've miscalculated." Captain Calloway, pacing at the far side of the bridge, stopped. His breath was shallow. "Commander, this is a suicide mission. We're not prepared to repel them. Not like this." Calloway had always been practical, cautious to a fault, but there was no time for caution now. Not when the Zorathians had gone too far, not when the heart of humanity's fleet hung in the balance. Mara's lips twitched. "The enemy's mistake isn't their attack. It's underestimating us." She turned to face him fully. "Get to the lower decks. Rally the soldiers. I'll take care of the bridge." Calloway hesitated, his brows furrowing. "You're not seriously thinking of facing them alone, are you?" "I've faced worse," she said, voice low, deliberate. A trace of something almost hungry flickered in her gaze. Riker was still frozen at the console. His mind was racing. He cut off as Mara strode toward the elevator, her boots clicking with purpose. "Commander. You can't just." Mara didn't even turn back. "I'm not asking for permission, Lieutenant." Her fingers moved swiftly to the control panel beside the elevator doors. She was already halfway to the lower decks before the door had even slid shut. The corridors were alive with chaos, but Mara moved through it like a shadow, her mind focused on the task ahead. The Zorathian invaders would be expecting resistance, probably some token effort. They wouldn't expect her. The walls of the ship groaned as the hull twisted under the impact of enemy fire, but Mara ignored it, the sound blending into her every step, her every breath. Her mind was already spinning through the plans. What will they try? What will they expect? She had studied the Zorathians for years. Their culture was built on precision, efficiency, but there was one thing they hadn't accounted for: humans. We were the wild card. We didn't follow their patterns, didn't behave like them. We fought with rage, with desperation, with something they could never understand. She reached the lower decks in record time. The space was dim, narrow, and smelled of overheated wires. The enemy soldiers were moving in formations, confident in their overwhelming numbers. Mara could see their angular, chitinous forms crouched in the shadows. Too easy. Her pulse didn't quicken, her movements were deliberate, and her eyes locked onto the closest target, an armored Zorathian soldier, crouched behind a barrel, scanning the corridor. He was close enough that Mara could smell the bitter tang of his exoskeleton, like burnt metal and blood. Mara reached for the concealed blade at her side, her fingers brushing the cold steel. She was about to move when she heard a muffled sound behind her, another Zorathian, approaching fast. She was outnumbered, but that didn't matter. It never mattered. In one fluid motion, she threw herself into the shadows, the familiar rush of adrenaline flooding her system. She drew the blade, silent as death itself. The Zorathian turned just in time to catch the gleam of Mara's weapon. Before it could raise its weapon, she was on him, one strike to the throat, the other slicing through the joint in his armor. His body crumpled with a wet thud, but Mara was already moving, pulling herself up the narrow corridor to the next. The fight had only just begun. Back on the bridge, Riker's voice came through the comms, shaking but determined. "Commander, we've got movement. More ships just dropped out of FTL. They're pushing harder now. The reinforcements are here." Mara didn't answer immediately. She was already too deep in the flow of battle, her blood pumping faster with every step. The enemy had underestimated her, underestimated humanity. And now, they would pay the price for that mistake. "Tell them to hold their ground," she replied, her voice cold, a promise in the void of space. "We'll show them what happens when they cross us." The battle had only just begun.